I'm grateful to Sydney Banks, who was gifted over a 3-day period and then a very short period, gifted with an epiphany-like experience where he indicated he saw what people call God was, he saw what life was, and he saw how the two were connected. And he said, "Doctor, while you were talking, I realized that I've been making myself crazy with my own thinking for 47 years, and I don't have to do it anymore."
Hello, coaches, wherever you're watching this on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, or YouTube. I'm back again for another short 20-minute conversation with one of our faculty on the upcoming AJC Coaching Career School. And today I'm joined by Dr. Bill Pettit. Hi, Dr. Pettit.
Hello. It's Bill to you, Ankush, but however.
Well, it's great to have you on this, Bill, and it's great to have you in the faculty. Some of the faculty are the same this year, and some of them are new, and you're one of our first-time members of the faculty. And I'm really glad that you said yes. And the reason I wanted you in the faculty is I've known of you for a few years. You're a psychiatrist, but grounded very much in the three principles understanding, which I also got trained in all the way back in 2012 and informs a lot of the work that I do. But interestingly, last year, yourself and your wife Linda started working with Steve Hardison, and so you've done a short agreement with him, and there are a lot of people who are now interested in the work of Steve and the work of being, as he calls it. And so I wanted to bring you on board as faculty, as someone who could talk about both those different influences in the way that you work with people and how you see them either connected or separate. So maybe we just start there and see if you've got any thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, I share with people I have 37% Irish, 37% Swedish, and the rest, I guess, who knows a little bit of everything. So the thing on the Irish part of me is that you have absolutely no idea how to make a long story short, right? I'll do my best. You hit it right on the head. 41 years ago, and I just had my 82nd birthday. I'm incredibly grateful for each day. I think that before I met Sydney Banks in 1983 on April Fool's Day, I think I was headed probably for an early grave because of the degree of 6 to 9 hours a day of stressful thinking that I was doing and activating my hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, known as the stress response. And I think I probably would have died of probably some heart problem or cancer or something at a fairly early age. So I'm just incredibly grateful. But I'm grateful to Sydney Banks, who was gifted over a 3-day period and then a very short period, gifted with an epiphany-like experience where he indicated he saw what people call God was, he saw what life was, and he saw how the two were connected, which is pretty huge. Being a welder with a 9th grade education, he saw also that he eventually would be lecturing at colleges and universities in Canada and the United States and eventually in Europe. And it all came true. And writing books, which he had not read any books at all since his 9th grade education. And he wrote 10 books, 6 of which have been published. So I'm incredibly grateful to Sydney Banks. It's interesting. I was thinking this morning of gratitude. In the early days, I was also very grateful to Dr. Roger Mills and George Pransky, who really took these 3 universal principles of mind, thought, and consciousness and kind of applied them, if you will, to psychology. And then Elsie Spittle, whose husband was a workmate in a pulp mill in Canada on Vancouver Island with Sydney Banks. She resisted it for a year and a half. She was frightened by his experience, but she later became an incredible teacher, and she's really kept the idea, I don't know how, I'm not saying it right, but she's kept the spiritual, that said this was a spiritual message, not religious, but a formless, addressing the formless aspect of being a human being. And so that was important for me through the years, that she kept that alive. And then you're right, a lot of circumstances that led to it. But last year, I worked with Steve Hardison for 10 hours. And I had before, about a year and a half earlier, I'd met Steve Chandler. And I will tell you that I was thinking this morning of gratitude that Steve Hardison and Steve Chandler assisted me to a deeper level of spiritual understanding that bridged me to action, if you will. I hate to use these words, but I felt like not reborn, But I felt reinvigorated, and I have felt more alive the last 8 months than I've felt for many years. And I'm deeply grateful to both Steve Chandler and Steve Hardison for that. The relationship that I see is that we're gifted as human beings. We're gifted this gift of thought, but it's not just the gift of thought. We're gifted the gift of consciousness and the gift of mind, which is a spiritual intelligence. And if people don't know that their brain is being powered by a spiritual intelligence before and beyond the intellect, then the only thing they have to do, have available to them to go through life, is their intellect. And to me, and I'll talk about more when I'm at the course, but to me, only about 4% of life, Ankush, is really directly amiable to analytical thinking. And people go, wait a minute, I spend 96% of my time in my analytical thinking. And I did too. And it wasn't working out well. I went in and out of clinical depression for about 20 years until I met Sid Banks. And part of it, I thought it was because of external circumstances and even my genes and all that. And it wasn't. It was from 6 to 9 hours a day. I was metaphorically slamming my fist against my head with worry, guilt, resentment, upset, overanalyzing, unresolved grief, and then wondering why I had metaphorically a terrible headache, for me, a terrible depression. So to me, we use these gifts to create a state of being. I talk about that I have been gifted with the ability as a physician and a lifelong student of neuroscience and medicine and psychiatry, along with the principles since 1983, that I think I facilitate the realization of and the understanding of the connection between our spiritual nature, our formless nature. There's something formless about life that when we die is no longer in the body, I think very much still alive. But so the formless spiritual nature and our formed psychological nature and our formed physical nature and our state, which creates a state of being from which we act on. So that to me, that like a friend recently asked me to read a book on bipolar disorder, taking charge of bipolar disorder. And that the people involved and even the people that care right now, it's clear that they have, as I listen to this audiobook, that they think that this is an entity, as most people do, that it's an entity, this bipolar disorder. To me, it's not. It's not an entity. It's a state of being that people have innocently, no blame, innocently gotten caught up in a lot of fearful, upsetting thinking, activating things, physiological dysregulation in the body, innocently, that has eventually created louder and louder alarms that the person hasn't been able to understand and led to disability and impairment. And that's really different, because if it really is a state of being, it's not about managing it as an illness. It's about coming back to a state of mental well-being, which to me, spiritual healing is possible 100% of the time. And when spiritual healing occurs, when people come to a place of peace with the past, with the future, with the inevitability of death, when people come to a state of peace where they're then free to live life fully and to love fully and freely and to receive love fully and freely. And that's a real free person, regardless of color, education, economics. It's an inside job. And that's exciting. And I hope in my presentation to be able to talk even more about that. But if we have a couple of minutes, I'm open to questions about what I said.
Yeah, no, I love this. And I'm so looking forward to the 2-hour masterclass, because I know we're going to be able to go so much deeper in this. But I'd love to tease out, because one of the things I didn't say in the introduction is I've used some of your content in the work that I do with clients. And specifically, there was a video that you did with the mother of a client who had gone through some incredible trauma, and she had really been healed before she passed away, unfortunately. And I use it as an example of the power of this work that you do, which has only gotten enhanced through your work, as you said, with the two Steves. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that in terms of, because I think if people knew the kind of case studies that you work with, I mean, they go beyond what people think, whether it's in psychology or coaching, is actually even possible. And so for me, what's really helpful is seeing that there are far-reaching implications of what you're talking about beyond, just dropping a little bit of stressful thinking.
Right. Tell me how much time we have left so
Got
I can.
about 8 minutes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I could tell a couple of stories, but what you're saying is so true. I mean, I will just I suppose I could be accused of teasing people, but I'm going to give kind of a smattering of some of the things rather than telling a long story. And 6 months after I met Sydney Banks in 1983, and I can talk more when I have 2 hours about the circumstances of people, but I was in a state hospital in my hometown working in a state hospital. And I literally had a man in a third session of 21 people with the diagnosis of schizophrenia, and he had been in the state hospital for 47 years. And he started laughing and laughing, not just giggling, Ankush, where he was laughing, his eyes were watering, he was holding his stomach. And that is more infectious than any COVID variant, because within 30 seconds, everyone in the room, including me and the psychologist, was holding our stomachs. Our eyes were watering, we were laughing, and we were begging him to stop. I said, "What's his name?" He said, "Herb." I said, "Herb, stop it." But he didn't. He went on for 7 to 10 minutes. And when he finally stopped, I waited until he got his breath. And I waited till he'd wiped his eyes. And I said, "Herb, tell us if you can, what was so funny?" And he picked up his chair, which had been askew from the group for the first 2.5 sessions, as he had talked very quietly to his auditory hallucinations, but not bothering me, so I didn't do anything. And he put it, and he looked across the room, just as I am looking at you right now. And he said, "Doctor, while you were talking, I realized that I've been making myself crazy with my own thinking for 47 years, and I don't have to do it anymore." Wow. 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 And he got out of the hospital after 47 years. I had to get him off all his medicines within a very short period of time. He was on a number of them because why? Because his whole physiology changed in that split second, Ankush. He was no longer creating incredible dysregulation and even what they call epigenetic changes in which genes were on. Only 10% of our genes are ever on, like light bulbs. The other 90% are off. They're waiting for emergencies to come on for a short period of time, not for a permanent time. And two others one was a lady who was in a full-blown manic episode. And she, a 26-year-old woman, it was her 5th hospitalization in 7 months. She was talking 280 miles an hour. It was at West Virginia University. I was covering for a friend of mine on the adult unit while he was on vacation. And I sat with her, and she was on 2,100 milligrams of lithium and 800 milligrams of quetiapine, also called Seroquel, the maximum dose. And she still had been awake for 44 hours in this incredibly fired up state. And I listened for 2 or 3 minutes thinking maybe I can understand what she's trying to communicate, but I couldn't. And I finally asked her, went to stillness, because I trust in that spiritual wisdom within our consciousness. And what came to me was to ask her to hold her hand when she could stop talking for 45 seconds. And she did. And I said, "Molly, you are completely mentally healthy. You just don't know it. You've gotten caught up in a lot of upsetting thinking. It's dysregulated all kinds of things in your body. You are perfectly mentally healthy." Fast forward, the healing started that moment. Fast forward, doesn't always happen. Is it a magic wand? No, but that's what came to me. Fast forward 6 months later, she's off all of her Seroquel. She's on 300 milligrams of lithium instead of 2,100. She's fast tracking through a nursing program. She's now an RN, or she has been for many years. And I presented with her to the grand rounds at the university with nurses, psychologists, social workers, psychiatric residents, psychiatric faculty. And at the end of it, I asked any questions. And a resident said, "Molly, what did you think when the doctor told you that you were perfectly mentally healthy when you're in a fluid psychosis?" And she smiled. She's a cute little gal. She's really, and now she's, of course, this is what, 21 years later or 20 years later. She said, the first thing that came to my mind was, oh my God, they've given me a psychiatrist that's crazier than I am. Which Ann Cushion really is pretty brilliant, that even in the midst of her psychosis, me telling her that she was mentally healthy resonated as crazy. But she said that came from here, and right after it came a different thought from a different place. And I knew that what he had just said was perfectly true. I knew it. And the healing began that moment. And the third one I'll mention is the one you mentioned. It was a lady who had been brutally assaulted and at gunpoint, both physically and sexually, for a number of hours by a Massachusetts patrolman. It was on CNN, and he was finally captured, and she was beaten and again, sexually and physically assaulted. And subsequent to that, she had a college degree with 2 majors. Subsequent to that, over 9 years, she had 23 hospitalizations. And she was going to be sent to the state hospital for a long period because of so many suicide attempts. And when I came onto the unit, she was screaming at the nurse saying, why won't they just let me kill myself? And I'll tell the story with more detail, but I spoke up as I came onto the unit with 20 of the missing links of Mr. Banks's, because the nurse had seen such miracles happen when I had covered 2 weeks before, including Molly. So I spoke and I said, whatever you want to kill yourself over is over. She got very angry. She yelled at me for 2.5 minutes, which was true. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know what she'd gone through. And then I said, what you've just said is true, perfectly true. But what I said is true also. And I know what you want. She said, you don't know what I want. I said, yeah, you do. I do. You want to be at peace, and you want to give and receive love freely, like the rest of us. And I left. And I heard later that within 10 seconds, she said to the nurse, how do I get to see that man when I get out of here? And she told her mother when she came to visit, Mom, after 9 years, I think I've met somebody who can help me. So you're right. I never witnessed anything like that in my residency in psychiatry, nor am I aware that for most people, maybe there's a man named David Hawkins, you've probably read Power versus Force, that I wonder if he didn't. It sounded like he had some experiences.
Thank you, Bill. I wish we could carry this conversation on, but I'm really committed to keeping these to 20
Sure,
minutes.
sure.
And what wonderful stories. And I'm really looking forward to the masterclass to go deeper into both your stories and what you've seen and the work you do. And for us to take it on as coaches and see the impact that we can have on our clients goes way beyond what people might consider in traditional coaching or the helping profession. So thank you once again for agreeing to be part of the faculty. And I'm really looking forward to your masterclass later this year.
Thank you very, very much. And the last thing I will say is to remember that it starts with us. It starts with us, and it's incremental, and we need to be gentle with ourselves on the journey. That's what I would ask people to be, gentle with themselves. Thank you so much. I'm excited. I'm also excited to be part of the faculty.
Thank you.